Streaming.
Hey guys, good morning. Welcome to Social Studies. Today, our unit's going to be on World War II. And what I have here, this is optional, you don't have to do this, but this is it's called a know, want, what did I learn? So the K is for what do I know about World War II? What do I want to know? And then when you're done, what did I learn? Okay. So you can certainly use that to help you when you're done with this. You don't have to do it. It's just optional. Sometimes, we do these, the teachers do the end of the units to make sure that the students kind of, especially this last column, what did I learn about World War II would be important. Okay. So last week we covered World War One, and in class, I've mentioned this a couple times. A lot of people think that World War II started the day World War One ended. And that goes back to like the Treaty of Versailles, which we covered. It basically made Germany solely responsible for the war. They had to pay back all this money. They lost land. Part of the land they lost was a big coal producing region. So basically, their country was crippled economically. They could only have so many soldiers, so many weapons. So Germany felt like it really wasn't fair and they couldn't defend themselves. So I want to go ahead and read this. So it says the instability created in Europe by the First World War One set the stage for another international conflict, World War II, which broke out 2 decades later and would prove even more devastating. Rising to power in economically and politically unstable Germany, Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, rearmed the nation and signed strategic treaties with Italy and Japan to further its ambitions of world dominance. Hitler's invasion of Poland in September 1939 drove Great Britain and France to declare war on Germany, and World War II had begun. Over the next 6 years, the conflict would take more lives and destroy more land and property around the globe than any other previous war. Among the estimated 45 to 60 million people killed, 6 million Jews were murdered in Nazi concentration camps as part of Hitler's diabolical final solution, now known as the Holocaust. So, a couple things I want to talk about. So it says rising to power in economically and politically unstable Germany. So they were really economically crippled after the First World War One. I talked about them having to pay back all the money that from all the damage in World War One, and then the politically unstable. They didn't have an army. Obviously, the chancellor at the time basically was shamed for losing the war. So really, there were a lot of factors that led to Hitler being able to kind of come into power in Germany. But the biggest two was the economics and the politically unstable nature of when a country loses a war and then all the other countries point the finger at them saying you were to blame for this and you have to pay us back. Okay. The devastation of the Great War, World War I is no time, had greatly destabilized Europe. In many respects, World War II grew out issues left unresolved by the earlier conflict. In particular, political and economic instability in Germany and lingering resentment over the harsh terms imposed by the Versailles Treaty fueled the rise to power of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Okay, did you know as early as 1923, in his memoir and propaganda attack Mein Kampf, My Struggle is what Mein Kampf means, Adolf Hitler predicted a general European war that would result in the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. So after becoming the chancellor in 1933, Hitler swiftly consolidated power, noting himself the Führer, the supreme leader, in 1934. He was obsessed with the idea that the superiority of a pure German race, what he called Aryan. Hitler believed that war was the only way to gain the necessary Libersum, or living space, for the race to expand in the mid-1930s after it began rearmament of Germany, secretly in violation of Versailles. So Hitler wanted to take back all the land that they had lost in all the treaties from World War I. And he also felt that Germany had the right to defend himself. So he went and started arming Germany again with tanks, airplanes, guns, things like that. Things that strictly went against what the Versailles Treaty said they could have. Okay. So after signing alliances with Italy and Japan against the Soviet Union, Hitler sent troops to occupy Austria in 1938. In the following year, he took over Czechoslovakia. Hitler's open aggression went unchecked as the United States and Soviet Union were concentrated on internal politics at the time, and neither France or Britain, two of the nations devastated by Great World War I, were eager for confrontation. So, after World War I and all the devastation, a lot of European countries weren't real eager to get another war. It was only 20 years prior, and you can imagine why. I mean, they lost lots of lives, property was destroyed. It's extremely expensive to fight a war. So all those countries were still trying to get back on their feet. So you could see why they really weren't super interested in going back to another world war 20 years later. Okay. So in 1939, Hitler and the Soviet leader Stalin signed the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, which incited a frenzy of war in London and Paris. Hitler had long planned on the invasion of Poland, a nation to which Great Britain and France had guaranteed military support if attacked by Germany. The pact with Stalin meant Hitler would not face a war on two fronts. Once he invaded Poland, he would have Soviet assistance in conquering and dividing the nation itself. So on September 1, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland from the west. 2 days later, France and Britain declared war on Germany, bringing World War II. So really, he signed this pact with Russia saying, Russia's not going to get involved. We're not going to be aggressive towards each other. That way, Russia couldn't really help with Poland once Hitler invaded that. As we'll find out later, Hitler went back on that pact and later basically did attack Russia. So on September 17th, Soviet troops invaded Poland from the east. Under attack from both sides, Poland fell quickly, and by early 1940, Germany and the Soviet Union had divided control of the nation according to secret protocol appended to the Non-Aggression Pact. Stalin's forces moved to occupy the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and defeated a resistant Finland in the Russo-Finnish War. During the 6 months following the invasion of Poland, the lack of action on the part of Germany and the Allies in the West led to the talk in the news media of a phony war. At sea, however, the British and German battalions faced off in heated battle, and lethal German U-boat submarines struck at merchant ships bound for Britain, sinking more than 100 vessels in the first 4 months of World War II. Similar to what they did in World War I, Russia began sinking ships in the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of those were could have been from the United States, bringing supplies to England and the rest of Europe. Okay, once again, the submarines were a big part of Russia's war effort. Okay, then you can see in April 1940, Germany simultaneously invaded Norway and occupied Denmark, and the war began in earnest. On May 10th, German forces swept through Belgium and the Netherlands, what became known as the Blitzkrieg or Lightning War. 3 days later, Hitler's troops crossed the Meuse River and struck French forces to Sedan, located on the northern end of the Maginot Line, a elaborate chain of fortifications constructed for World War I and considered an impenetrable defense barrier. In fact, Germans broke through the line with their tanks and planes and continued to the rear, rendering it useless. The British Expeditionary Forces, BEF, were evacuated by sea in Dunkirk in late May, while in the south, French forces mounted a doomed resistance. With France on the verge of collapse, Benito Mussolini put his pact of steel with Hitler into action. Italy declared war against France and Britain on June 10th, 1940. So you can see, once again, similar to World War I, these alliances were taking place. So this time you had Germany, Italy, and Japan kind of all on the same side. And he made a pact with Russia saying Russia wouldn't basically go against Germany. So at this point, Russia was kind of a neutral observer, just not attacking Germany, but they did invade Poland. So you could see most of Europe at this time was basically falling to Germany. You could see they went through Norway, Denmark, Finland, Belgium. At this point, they basically had control of France. So on June 14th, German forces entered Paris. A new government formed by Marshal Philippe Pétain, France's hero war, to resist the armistice. 2 nights later, France was subsequently divided into 2 zones, one under German military occupation, and the other under the France's government. Hitler now turns attention to Britain, which had the defensive advantage, being separated from the continent by the English Channel. So they had water kind of basically separating them from the rest of Europe, the English Channel. To pave the way for his ambitious invasion, dubbed Operation Sea Lion, German planes bombarded Britain extensively throughout the summer of 1940, including night raids on London and other industrial centers that caused heavy civilian casualties and damage. So the Germans just started bombing England mercilessly. And a lot of these are big population centers, also industrial centers where English would make the weapons they need to fight a war. So basically, England now was basically under attack too from Germany. And they did it with planes because it was a little bit easier than crossing the channel. So it said the Royal Air Force eventually defeated the German Air Force in the Battle of Britain. Hitler proposed plans to invade. With Britain's defensive resource pushed to the limit, Prime Minister Winston Churchill began receiving crucial aid from the U.S. leader under the Lend-Lease Act proposed by Congress in 1941. So the United States still hadn't basically gone into the war yet, but they were basically providing military assistance to England to help defend against Germany. Okay, and you can see 1941-42, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria joined up with Germany. German troops overran Yugoslavia and Greece that April. So Hitler's conquest of the Balkans was a precursor to his real objective, invasion of the Soviet Union, whose vast territory gave the German master race the living space they needed. The other half of Hitler's strategy was the extermination of Jews from throughout German-occupied Europe. Plans for the final solution were reduced around the time of the Soviet offensive. In the next 3 years, more than 4 million Jews would perish in the death camps established in occupied Poland. So then on June 22nd, Hitler ordered the invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa. Though Soviet tanks and aircrafts greatly outnumbered the Germans, their air technology was largely obsolete, and the impact of the surprise invasion helped Germans get within 200 miles of Moscow by mid-July. That was the capital of Russia. So if the Germans were able to overtake Moscow, they basically would control Russia. So arguments between Hitler and his commanders delayed the next German advance until October, when it was stalled by a Soviet counteroffensive at the onset of harsh winter weather. So Russia is really far north, especially Moscow. So what happened, since they waited till October to try to go into Moscow, the weather got really cold, and a lot of the German troops didn't have the proper winter gear to fight the war during the winter. So a lot of them got cold, a lot of them froze, a lot of them died, and that kind of stalled out Germany making it all the way to Moscow. Okay. So at this time, you could see most of Europe was on Germany's side, except for like France and England. So with Britain facing Germany and Europe, the United States was the only nation capable of combating Japanese aggression, which by late 1941 included the expansion of its ongoing war with China and the siege of European colonial homes in the Far East. On December 7th, 1941, that was Pearl Harbor. That's when the Japanese attacked Hawaii. So in the day later, the United States agreed to get into World War II after Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. And it says after a long string of Japanese victories, the U.S. Pacific Fleet won the Battle of Midway. And that kind of proved to be the turning point of the war. For the first time, we had won a battle. And you can see it was in the Solomon Islands. These are mostly islands in the Pacific by Hawaii, which up until that point, Japan had been dominating. So really, after Midway, it was the first real victory for the United States. Okay. Then you can see in North Africa, British and American forces defeated the Italians and Germans by 1943. So Germany had even gone into Africa because they wanted this living space for their citizens. And then an Allied invasion of Sicily and Italy followed. Mussolini government fell in 1943. But we would continue fighting the Germans until 1945. So on World War II's Eastern Front, this is the Soviet Union. The Soviets were able to launch a counteroffensive in 1942 and end in the bloody Battle of Stalingrad, which had seen some of the fiercest combat of the war. The approach of winter, along with dwindling food and medical supplies, spelled the end for German troops there, as the last of them surrendered in 1943. This goes back to what I was saying. The winters got so cold, the Germans didn't have the proper food, the winter coats, things like that. So basically in 1943, in the Soviet Union, the Germans basically surrendered. But obviously, the war in Europe was still going strong. And June 6, 1944, celebrated D-Day as the Allies began a massive invasion of Europe, landing 156,000 British and Canadian military on the beaches of Normandy. So basically, that was really when we basically started to take control of Europe. We landed all these forces on this beach, and it was really one of the bloodiest battles because the Germans weren't up on this hill, and we were just sending ships in on the beach, and they were up high, so they were shooting down on all the troops. So really, it was just sheer force. We were able to send that many troops onto the beach to get into that point of France to try to fight back the Germans. So you can see December 1944, 1940, the last major offensive of the war. Intensive aerial bombardment in February preceded the Allied invasion of Germany, which time Germany formally surrendered on May 8th. The Soviets had already been in Germany, and Hitler was already dead, having committed suicide April 30th. So 1945, World War II ends. And then this is the Potsdam Conference. This is similar to the Versailles Treaty. This talks about basically what's going to happen after World War II. You can read a little bit about that. But basically, so World War II proved the most devastating international conflict in history, taking the lives of some 35 to 60 million, including 6 million Jews who died at the hands of Nazis. Millions were injured and still more lost their homes and property. The legacy of the war would include the spread of communism from the Soviet Union to Eastern Europe, as well as the eventual triumph in China, and the global shift in power from Europe to two rival superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. So after the Second World War II, basically the United States and Russia came out as kind of the dominant world powers, and that would lead to what we'll talk about as a Cold War. So what you can do, this is just a timeline, and you can go back in the article and just kind of fill in these important dates. And down here, this is kind of, so you can see 14 to 18, World War I, 34, Hitler appoints himself supreme leader. 1939, Hitler invades Poland, France, and Britain declares war on Germany. This is Pearl Harbor. This is D-Day. Germany surrenders. And then in 1945, the end of the war, we drop atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which really got Japan to surrender. Okay. And then you can see here, you guys, there's some video questions. And in the Google Classroom, I put the links to, I think there's 4 videos. They're all maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes. hopefully the links work so you can just go and watch the videos. So it's about Japanese internment camps is one. There's one on concentration camps. There's one on Rosie the Riveter. And that one's all about women, since most of the men were fighting in the war. Women basically went into factories and started making the supplies that we needed for the war. And the last one, I guess there's only three. So you can go ahead and watch the videos, go ahead and answer the questions. You can do that. You don't have to do it right now. You can do it when you get a chance. All right, you guys, thanks so much. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.